guys, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome back home, I guess. I am back from my month of staying in Italy and so on. I'm really happy that I'm finally back, and I have a very exciting new project that you can already check out here in the background. It's actually this beautiful mock-up that I have right here. It's gonna be a winter dress, which has like somewhat of a Victorian, I guess, bodice concept with the sleeves and, you know, the triangle shape here and so on and so forth. And I'm super excited. This is actually a little story time. So I made the pattern for this mock-up on the computer based off of a dress that I already made. The cocktail dress Ramona, which you can check out up here, is also a really, really cute dress that I made. And I just constructed a new pattern off of that dress. If you know which dress I'm talking about, it looks nothing like this. So there's like a lot of changes that I put into this pattern, and I printed it out and tried it out in my mock-up fabric, and I was like, never ever is gonna be like perfect, and it's never ever gonna be no fitting in this process, and voila! So here we are. This is the mock-up. It looks perfect. I have only a few things that I wanted to change. Some were just, you know, mistakes that I made during sewing, which, for example, it was the collar, it was too small, which is fine in the pattern. So I just changed a little bit of the proportions. So I made the collar a tiny bit bigger, and that's basically it. I made the facings and I called it a day. So it was like a super, super quick fitting and pattern making process, which I'm really, really happy about. I also love how I did the top stitches here, which I will be doing on my fascia fabric as well. I have this beautiful fabric here. I'm super excited to see how this dress is gonna look like with this fabric. This is a wool mix, and it's basically, it's a coat fabric, but I was like, I don't care, it's so beautiful, I'm gonna make a dress out of it, which is fine. So yeah, that's basically all that I have to say. Let's start. I have all of my fabric pieces prepared right here in front of me. I went ahead and also cut out a lining for my dress because I have this woolen fabric, and I think it's gonna be quite uncomfortable if you have this on your skin because it's gonna itch you. So I just went ahead and cut out a lining for it as well. It's basically the same pattern for the lining again. That should be fine. I don't see why there should be any issue, as this is not like an outer garment where you have to, you know, do some specific things in order to really have a good pattern that works. So that's what I did here. I'm not gonna show you how I'm gonna be making the lining because it's literally gonna be put together the same way as the outer fabric, just minus the top stitches. So don't worry about that. If you have any other fabric like a cotton or anything that is not scratchy, you don't need a lining. Just as a heads up, this is supposed to be a winter dress, so I figured I'd mention it since some might also choose a woolen blend or something like similar to mine. I also went ahead and added my interfacing to all of the pattern pieces that needed, the interfacing guide as well as the material list, everything explained, all the info that you need to make this dress on top of my video here will be addressed in the pattern that you can get at the link down below on my Etsy shop. If you haven't already checked it out, I have so many patterns. There's for sure something that fits your style and that you might be interested in, so go ahead and check that out. You can also get this dress right here, and also I am going to have like a huge Black Week sale, so keep an eye out for that. Follow me on my Insta to get like all of the notifications and updates for sales, because I always post in my stories when I have a sale going on. Link is also down in the description below. Let's start. So what I will be doing, first of all, for all of my pattern pieces is to just overlock all around it one time for all of the pieces, because this tends to fray. If you've ever worked with this type of fabric before, it's going to fray as it's like a very thick weave, and if something like as thick as this frays a lot, you just like lose a lot of your pattern piece, which you want to avoid, obviously, as then otherwise the pattern just won't fit you. So I will be doing that. So don't worry about the color of my overlocking machine. It really doesn't matter for me, at least, because I am lining my piece. Another thing that I wanted to mention, if you are working with a patterned fabric like mine, like if you have some sort of lines or checkered weave or pattern on your fabric, while cutting out your pattern, you have to check that, for example, in the center back and also, especially also in the center front, your lines match up. Like there's going to be a zipper right here, so this is going to be very visible if these two lines here match up or don't. And you don't want to have this. So make sure to like get this correct and have this lined up perfectly so that everybody can be happy, especially yourself. At least that's something I really, really want to do, because I will be so mad if it wouldn't work or if it's not gonna match up. Anyways, so now that I have this overlocked here in place, we're going to put the darts into all of our pieces. So I have my dart drawn onto the wrong side of my fabric. I'm just going to match them up here and sew in the dart. And I'm going to do something special for the darts in this particular dress. You obviously don't have to do that. It's just a design decision that I made because I did it with my mock-up and I absolutely love how it looks. This is a unicolor fabric though. This is a checkered fabric. I hope it's going to look the same or like also as good as it does with the unicolor one. I'm not sure about that. But I will be using a contrasting or like somewhat contrasting thread for this. So this is the color of the lighter panels here. So my hope is that once I sew over top of my darker panels here, it's going to be visible and it's going to make, you know, an interesting top stitching. But as you can see, it's going to contrast somewhat. So now, instead of ironing this towards the center back like you would usually do, I'm going to just flatten it like right in the center of the dart. And now, once this is flattened, we're going to top stitch very closely to the dart here. Up here, come to a point and go down there on the other side of the dart. At least that's what I'm going to do. And this is going to fix the dart in place, give a nice structure to the bodice, and also, you know, it's really nice to have the top stitches there, in my opinion, for this dress. And now that is what it looks like. I'm like, it's okay because it like kind of disappears. You can't really see the stitches, at least, kinda, which is fine. So like it didn't work out as I hoped for, but you know, we're gonna make it work. We're gonna do that nevertheless, because I also really like how it structures the bodice. You can like see it, it's like, it's good. And this is what it looks like on the other side. I actually managed to like somewhat do this pretty centered here, like the ironing, and the stitches here are somewhat centered. Like you're never gonna get it perfectly, which is totally fine. And that's what it looks like to show you. And now we can continue doing that to all of the other pieces with the darts in there. So the lower front, the other back piece, and the sleeves. So what I have here is the upper and the lower front pieces. And as you can see, I switched up the grain line on my upper pieces right here because I figured it would be really nice if the pattern just meets at the center front. That's why I did this. So it's basically on the bias now to prevent any stretching. And since my piece is going to get lined, I put interfacing onto the full upper front, like the piece that lays on the bias, just to prevent any stretching out. As this one just lays on the grain as per usual, I did not do that for the lower front. Now I can put the upper and the lower front right sides together and close this seam right here. And what top stitch very closely together. So I did mine like 2 millimeters or even 1 apart. And that really looked super elegant. So that's what I will be doing here. So now that this matches up really well, like I'm surprised myself at how well this actually matches up. Also that the pattern here just continues but is not exactly the same. I kind of like that because the pattern in total is like not symmetrical, so you know, you can't really mirror it if you have diagonal pieces, but nevertheless it worked out really well. I'm super happy. We can continue and put the button tape onto one side. So I want to have the button tape sitting on this side right here. So this is going to be the one overlapping this side. somewhat like this. And I cut out a button tape out of a facing fabric. This is just 100% cotton, so as to not add any more thickness to the piece, we're just going to put right sides together and sew down this line right here, and then we can continue working. So let's do that. Let's iron the seam allowance into the facing, and then we're going to fold it again and iron it into the piece, making sure that the ditch of the seam is folded fairly enough to the wrong side of the fabric so that it's not going to be visible once we have it on, you know. And this is going to sit like right on top here. And now when we turn this wrong sides facing up, the facing of the button tape should match up with the other side that doesn't have the facing on. So basically this is how it's going to end up sitting at the very end, and I'm just checking if everything matches up nicely. Now in order to get the collar onto this, the easiest way, there are two methods, both I think are fine. So we could go ahead and put our back piece on the shoulder seam already and therefore have the complete seam for the collar, or we can sew the two pieces from the front together and then have to cut into our piece here, like right here somewhere, so that we can separate these two pieces, which is also not a big deal. That's how I did it with my tryout fabric and it worked fine. That way you make sure basically that you have a very neat finish here. So I guess we're going to do that way. Let me think for a second. Okay, I thought about a solution, and the easiest way is to put the collar on at the very end, because I have a lining. So if you don't have a lining, this is completely irrelevant. You can still put the collar on at the very end. You can put it on whenever you want, honestly, but it doesn't change anything if you put it in the very end. So we can like all follow along with this now. But especially for if you have a lining, that is basically the only piece where you attach it together, if that makes sense. Like obviously you have the facing in the sleeve, and yeah, that's basically it. So there are like 3 points where you attach lining and outer fabric together, which are the facings in the sleeve and the collar. And since we're not going to put the lining and the outer fabric together anywhere else, like it's just going to be roaming freely basically, we have access from the inside. So the sleeve facing point, attachment point, doesn't matter to us because we can always get to it. But the collar is something that we have to leave open until the lining is done too, because we're going to put the collar onto all the layers and it's going to have a neat finish, if that makes sense. So if you were to put the collar on now with just the outer fabric sandwiched in between basically, where is the lining going to go? You know, like how are you going to finish the edge of the lining? You basically have to hand stitch it in place, and since I want to avoid this we're going to put the collar at the very end, like last step. So that means basically that we can just put the button tape together with the other side of my outer fabric just at 1 centimeter. And now if we put this as prepared right on top here, we can go ahead and add top stitches. And what I'd like to do is actually add a triple row of top stitches also like right here, which is going to hold together not only the button tape itself with the right side of your bodice, but also the bodices together as well. So we're basically going to top stitch like somewhere here, making sure that our center point, like our center front point, remains in the center front. So it's at 1.5 centimeters. So our button tape is going to be 3 centimeters wide. So that's the plan. It looks really, really nice, and as you can see, I have my like triple top stitches right here. You can see it better up here in the darker area. So the front is basically done now. I think I'm going to go ahead and just sew on the buttons already, because now it's flat and I have like a better access to it. I'm not sure, since I'm machine stitching them on. That's why if you hand stitch it, obviously it doesn't matter when you put the buttons on. But I think I'll go ahead and do that right now. I have 8 buttons, I think, and I just put them on measuring by eye, but I'm going to measure obviously again and then rearrange them however I see fit. And then there's going to be a button up here in the collar area, which will be the 9th button. So that's the plan. I'll be back once the buttons are on. We can continue now putting the bodice completely together. So we're going to add the back pieces onto the shoulder in preparation to put the sleeves in. So we're just gonna close the shoulder seam right there, right sides together. I'm going to iron the seam allowance into the back as per usual, as it's just gonna lay nicer that way. The shoulder is a tiny bit bigger in the back piece than it is in the front piece. Therefore, I figure it looks better if you just iron the seam allowance into the back. I'm not gonna add any top stitches for that seam. I don't think it needs it. You can do obviously whatever you want. And just like that, we're ready to put the sleeves in. Since we have a facing in the sleeve hem, I figure it's the easiest to put the sleeve hem facing onto the sleeve hem already before we actually sew the side seams together. We're gonna do it as we always do it. We're not going to put the side seams together until after the sleeve is in the armhole, because it's way easier. And since we have a facing anyways for the sleeve hem, the side seam won't also peek out of our hem, because it's going to be hidden like on the inside where the facing ends. So that's what I will be doing first. I'll be putting right sides of the facing and the sleeve together, and then just close this seam here, and then we're going to put the sleeve in. I also went ahead and understitched the seam here in order for the facing once it's like ironed up, which we're going to do as the next step. We're going to iron this up so that the ditch of the seam is only visible on the facing side. This is just preparation. Obviously we're going to like fold it back down once we put the side seams together, but it's better to have like a pre-ironed fold here for once we have the sleeve as a tube, as we're not going to be able to reach in that easily anymore. So that's why I like personally to prepare my seams just like that. We're gonna have like a puff right here. So we're going to gather the sleeve head, and you're gonna find your front and back sleeve points in your sleeve, and we're going to like stitch into the seam allowance only. Don't stitch outside of the seam allowance from one point to the other without back tacking, using your biggest stitch. I like to sew twice, top stitch twice, like very close together at like 2 millimeters apart, something like that, into the seam allowance, and then we can pull on the bobbin thread and you're gonna see that the sleeve gathers. So we're going to do that to both, and then we gather as much as we need to in order for the sleeve to fit into our smaller armhole. Okay, so now that I have the sleeves in place here, you can see this really, really beautiful puff that it already makes, and we want to preserve that. So we're not just going to iron it flat, because that's just going to diminish our puffy sleeve and the purpose of putting any volume in it. So we're just going to iron like just underneath where the puff starts, but up here we can almost leave it as is. What I want to do though is to steam the seam allowance a tiny bit in place, and for that purpose I'm going to lay down the shoulder seam flat and make sure that all of the seam allowance lays towards the sleeve, and then just And it's already time now to put the side seams together. So I'm going to take out my needles that I just put in here temporarily. I'm going to open it back up so that I can fold it on top of itself, because this is also going to get sewn together in one go. So therefore we're going to have a very neat finish at the sleeve hem. And I'm just going to like match up all of these seams, especially here where the facing meets. We want these to be like right on top here. And then the underarm, making sure that the seam allowance faces into the sleeve as we ironed it. This you can, by the way, if you start from the waistline of the bodice, this will automatically lay in the direction of the sleeve. So that's what I always recommend doing. Just sew along the whole sleeve and close the side seam. To iron this whole piece, we're actually going to iron the seam allowance open just to avoid any bulk. And what I will be doing here, because this is going to be like super thick here, I'm going to cut away the seam allowance to like 2 millimeters or something like that. Like I'm going to cut away like this kind of curve. And then once we iron this open, we're going to flatten it as much as possible with the iron itself. Now that the sleeve is already pressed, we can repress the sleeve area here, especially where the seam is, so that this is super flat. And this is gonna lay really nicely once it's like turned right sides out. As you can see, this makes like a really, really nice end here, and it's ready to have lining go inside. And that is the bodice. We can continue now with our skirts, and I'm going to do the front skirt first because we have pockets, of course, right here. If you watched my dindle series, in the skirt of my dindle I also made these kind of pockets. So basically you just have a slit in the waist seam going down into the piece. There we're going to add the pockets onto. I added interfacing onto this part just to stabilize it a bit, and now we can just put our pockets on there. I'm not gonna go too much into detail as I already covered that in that video that I mentioned. You can go and watch it up here and go to this timestamp there to see how the pockets are done in great detail. But basically I'm just gonna put my pocket on here, sew this very closely, put the other side on here. They're gonna meet at one point, and then we're basically just going to put them together. So let's just sew this at like 5 millimeters going to 1 millimeter on both sides. We can now go ahead and put the back piece onto the side here. I'm going to overlock both of them separately. So I'm going to overlock now this piece and also the side seams of the back piece separately so that I can iron this open and it's going to look nice. So let's do that. Now we can go ahead and gather the skirt. I'm going to do it the same way as I gathered the sleeves.
2 seconds later.
I changed my mind. I think pleats will look so much better here. For that I need my bodice piece because I don't know how long it is. Should be somewhere in the mid-60s. I want the side seams to match up. I think I have to change the direction of the pleats midway, otherwise it's just not gonna work. I want to have the fold here in the center front, like I really want to have it there. So I'm just going to like do that there, and then just for the sake of, you know, the pocket and then also the side seams and stuff, I'm just going to hide the pocket in another pleat, and I'm probably going to put it 3 centimeters next to the dividing seam. So now that the pleats are in, I ended up with 1, 2, 3 pleats facing towards the center back, and then one here in the center front that just meets in the center front, and then on the other side the same again. I can now put my bodice onto my skirt, making sure that all of the pleats now sit correctly, face the correct way, and obviously that all of the seams match up, like the side seam, like the center front here. So the center of the buttons needs to be right on top here. And while sewing the pleat right here, these also need to meet, like these need to be super close together in order for this to look nice. If this is just going to sit like a tiny bit apart, you will be able to see that, and that's not gonna look nice. And this is gonna be the challenge for the seam, to have this be perfect and match up the side seams here. We can go ahead and put the pockets where they're going to end up laying so that we have like everything in one go. We don't need to sew like double or whatever. So the reason why I like, or I tend to put my pockets more towards the middle, it's actually quite a reasonable one if you ask me. So also in my Dirndl dress I had the pocket rather in the middle. I really don't like when the pocket like drags on one side. Like for example, I have one phone obviously, so I put my phone in one pocket and it's always like the sides don't weigh the same anymore, so it drags one side down. If you have that in the front, that's not gonna happen. I mean, you have to get used to the feeling of weight in a different place, I guess, but at least the dress or the skirt is not gonna be mismatched again. So that's why I really like that. And once this is like on, the pockets will somewhat like spread open when you have your hands in there because it's a pleated skirt, so it has volume. So this is how it looks like. It ended up actually looking really, really nicely. I really am super happy that the stripes match up here. The pockets are in here and also the side seams match up. Now if we turn this around, we can go ahead and iron the seam allowance of the waist seam into the skirt. That's where it wants to sit. Okay, we can go ahead and put the zipper already in. So the zipper is going to go to the neckline. There's going to be the collar up here and we're just going to use hooks and eyes to put it together at the collar area. I have a 60 centimeter zipper. So I'm going to open this up. I'm checking where the stopper here folds over, and this fold here needs to be 1 centimeter lower, so like right at the stitching line here. And then I'm going to align this. I'm making sure that if anything, the zipper will be stretched and not the fabric to avoid any bubbling of the zipper. Now I can use a inseam zipper foot and sew the zipper in from here all the way down to like somewhere above the actual zipper, like somewhere here. Okay, let's close the zipper. And then what I always like to do is just pick some distinctive spots like the waist seam and put needles in so that I know exactly where it stops, like here as well, where the top stops here. And now I can just put this together right here where the seam meets. And now we can also sew this in place. Okay, so let's check out if this looks good. So very important to me that the waistline matches up and then also that the pattern matches up as good as possible. Let's iron this. Okay, I tried to like somewhat close this gap here with the iron, and now we can already put the lining in there. So obviously if you don't have a lining, you can just skip this step. I already made the lining the same way as I did the outer fabric apart from the button tape. So I basically just put the center fronts together and sewed at the center front line, which, you know, lays 1.5 centimeter more inwards, but there are notches in the pattern, so you can just easily draw a line there. I don't think that I did anything else. I gathered the skirt instead of pleating it, but it's other than that, it's the same. This is what it looks like, and this is what I meant with the center front. So that is 1.5 centimeter plus seam allowance, more towards the inside where I stitched this. I'm going to put the lining into our piece, how it's going to end up laying in the very end, and just stitch into the seam allowance at the neckline to fix it in place so that we have like one fused layer. And that is also going to ensure that we're gonna have an easier time to put the lining onto the zipper. So that's what we're gonna do afterwards. And now that that's in place, as you can see, it's sewn onto the neckline. We can put the lining onto the zipper. So what I will do for that is just take out everything and fold it over to the right side. So taking out the sleeves. And now I'm just going to put the right side of my lining onto the zipper, fold it over, and then just match up the waistline seam. Just pin the 2 layers together and using a one-sided foot sew the lining onto the zipper band. And obviously I'm going to do the same for the other side as well. Now that that's done, we can go ahead and turn everything right sides out. And we can also put the sleeve into the sleeve. I also cut into the seam allowance up here so that I can turn this over. This is what it looks like. I'm not too worried about like this. I really don't care because it's not going to be visible. Okay, that's good. I honestly don't care. I just want the lining to be away from the zipper teeth so that it's easy to like open up and close without it, you know, eating the lining basically. We can also close the seam here in the center back, putting right sides together. I want the seam to lay on the inside, and then I'm going to put this together. And here, cut into the seam allowance at the same spot. So as you can see, I didn't stop at the same spot. So I'm going to cut into the seam allowance right here, and then I will also mirror that placement. We can also go ahead and close the center back seam the same way that I did for the lining. So I basically just started pinning everything together, matching up the pattern, really important to me at least. And then up here I cut into the seam allowance just where I stopped stitching, so that I can sew up until the stitching line that I have here. And then I'm also going to iron it open as I did with the center back seam of the lining. And then we can go ahead and put the collar on, hem this piece, do the cuff situation, like put the lining onto the cuffs, and then we're done already. So super excited. Let's put the collar on. We're gonna take our outer pieces and prepare the seam that will be stitched onto the collar by just ironing the seam allowance up into the piece. Now we can take our facing and put right sides of the outer and inner collar together. We're going to stretch that so that this like fits together. We need this to like match up here at the seams. So we're going to put these seams together and start stitching right in the fold line and go all the way around. And we're gonna do the same here on the center back. Start right there in the fold line and then ease both pieces together. And now you can like clearly see how the facing is smaller, and we're just going to pull on it and match that up. So just start stitching in the fold line, go around the collar and stop right here in the center front at the fold line as well. Let's cut this down, and I'm going to cut this down pretty drastically here in the front to like 5 millimeters, and I think I'm also going to cut down the seam allowance of the outer fabric, so of the outer collar, like that. And then we can turn this right sides out. And now you can see here how it already wants to lay correctly so that the ditch is only visible on the facing side. Now we can put the collar on. For that I'm going to open the zipper a tiny bit, and we're gonna start putting the inner collar onto the lining, or like the wrong side of the fabric, either or, depends on if you have a lining. Just gonna put it like edge to edge so that everything matches up. And then you're gonna find the notches for like the shoulder seam. So since we have an overlap right here, I cut into the seam allowance here so that you can put it aside, like out of the way, and you can stitch right here over there. This is gonna get attached here where you cut into the collar, like that. And now we can sew from the center back right here all the way to the center front right there, and then attach the other side onto this. So now that that's attached, we can fold the outer collar over top here and just cover up the stitching line of where we put the inner collar onto this piece, and then just work our way around. I'm just gonna do that here as well so that this all looks nice. That's all pinned in place. I can go ahead and stitch very closely to the edge to finish the neckline. And then I'm gonna come back and do the same to the other side, with the only difference of the front, like the overlap basically laying in the front, following the overlap here at the button tape. I also went ahead and sewed on the button here onto the collar so that the front is basically now sewn together. As you can see, it is pretty strong. I will also put hooks and eyes onto the back here so that you can close this as the zipper ends where the collar begins. Now for everybody who has a lining, we're gonna do the hem of the sleeves. Now, everybody who doesn't have a lining, you can fix the facing in place however you want. You can do a top stitch right here, you can do a blind stitch on the inside, you can use hem tape. You know, there are so many different solutions for this for everybody who has a lining. First things first, go into your sleeve, make sure that the lining is not twisted. And now we're gonna go from the hem between the layers of lining and outer fabric. We're gonna go towards the inside into the sleeve, and now I can grab the facing at the seam and also the lining at the seam and take it out from the hem, as that's still separate. And now we can put right sides together of the sleeve facing and the lining sleeve, pin these together and ultimately sew them together too. You can do the same for the other sleeve, and that is how I fix my sleeve in place. I will probably also add some top stitches into my seams that I have in my outer layer, like the dart and the side seam, just to fix the facing in place. And we're gonna hem this. Also, honestly, you can hem this however you want. I am probably just going to like avoid having a thick hem, I'm just gonna overlock the hem and then just fold it up like 2 centimeters and top stitch it. Don't think that it's going to be too intrusive. I think that should be fine. And then once I'm done with that, since the lining and the outer fabric have the same length and I don't want the lining to peek through, I'm just going to do a double fold and have a neat finish, at least for the lining. So let's finish this piece, and yeah, the dress is done afterwards. And this is basically what I did when I have the dress on. The hem won't peek through because it's probably like this much shorter, as I did the double fold here and top stitched it. And with that, the dress is done. Oh no, let's put the eyelet on here. And now it's done. I added a clasp right there. And with that, my dress is completely done. That's it already for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. I have the link to the pattern down in the description below. Check out my Instagram. I will be updating you if I have any sales going on. I will be doing a Black Week sale, so keep an eye out for that. Also hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. I am uploading every Sunday, so ring the bell to get notified when I post next. And I hope you like this project. It's a tiny bit longer than what I intended to do, but you know, it's a really nice dress. I'm super happy with it. I hope you will be too with yours. If you recreate this, tag me on Instagram if you want to post it, and I'd be happy to share that in my stories as well. I'm always super excited to see your recreations of my patterns. It's such an honor and super exciting to see what you do. So thank you so much for watching, and I'm gonna see you next Sunday. Bye guys!